Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of our webinar series, Behind the Scenes with Lion Landscapes. My name is Paul Tsubi. I'm the communication assistant at Lion Landscapes, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. And I will be your host for the day. In this episode, we'll be exploring the importance of robust data to inform and evaluate conservation action, the different methods of collecting this data, and the collaborations we have developed with government wildlife departments and other partners around this research. I'm delighted to introduce Charlotte Searle, Senior Researcher at Lion Landscapes, and Joseph Francis, Darwin Project Assistant and Data Manager, who will be giving a fascinating insight into this crucial area of our work at Lion Landscapes. This will be done in form of a few questions I will be asking to our speakers directly. To our attendees, you too will have an opportunity to engage our speakers by using the Q&A feature. We will answer as many of these questions as we can at the end of the first session. Please note, we will only be answering questions in the Q&A function. By the end of this webinar, we hope to give a good insight in the ecological research techniques that we use and the importance of robust data to drive conservation action. Welcome all. Charlotte and Joseph, thank you very much for joining us. So we get started. So we start with you, Charlotte. Let's start with you. Can you please introduce yourself and your role at Lion Landscapes?
Thanks, Paul, and hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Searle, as Paul said. I'm a senior researcher at Lion Landscapes and a Dennis Curry postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Oxford in the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, Wild Crew. To give you a bit of context, at Lion Landscapes, as many of you probably know, we work in Kenya, Tanzania, and Zambia, but my work focuses mainly in Tanzania. And in Tanzania, if we could just show the maps on the slideshow, we work in two landscapes in the south of the country. These are Ruaha Rungwa, and this centers around the Ruaha National Park and Rungwa Game Reserve. And we also have Searle Nyerere, which centers around Searle Game Reserve and Nyerere National Park. So yes, these maps show you those two landscapes in southern Tanzania. So Ruaha Rungwa is on the left and Searle Nyerere is on the right. I started working with Lion Landscapes in Ruaha Rungwa in 2017 when I started my PhD research, where I was looking at the ecology of large carnivores, but particularly focusing on leopard, this guy, in that landscape. And I've been working with Lion Landscapes ever since, but since 2020, I've been focusing more on Searle Nyerere, where I've been leading large carnivore surveys and delivering training in carnivore monitoring techniques to our partners from protected area management authorities.
Thank you, Charlotte. Joseph, can you introduce yourself and your role with Lion Landscapes?
Thank you, Paro. Hi and good evening, everyone. I am Joseph Francis, and I take great pride in my role as both a Darwin project assistant and data manager within the esteemed organization Lion Landscapes. Since joining Lion Landscapes in early 2022, I have had the privilege of being involved in various projects that aim to make a positive impact on our wildlife and communities. As a data manager, I am passionate about utilizing data-driven insights to driven informed decision-making and bring about meaningful changes. So far, I have witnessed the power of collaborative efforts and innovative solution in addressing ecological challenges. It is my firm belief that by working together, we can create a sustainable and thriving future for generations to come. Today, I'm thrilled to share my knowledge and experiences with all of you. Together, let us explore the possibilities, exchange ideas, and foster a collective commitment to conserve large carnivores. Thank you for having me here, and I'm looking forward to our engaging and inspiring discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Quite indeed. Yeah, we're looking forward to discussing all this. Searle mentions evidence-based conservation. Can you explain what this is and why is it so important?
Yeah, so evidence-based conservation describes how we make use of information to inform management decisions and policy, and in doing so, help secure a better conservation outcome for wildlife and wild places. So this approach where we collect and use real-time data for conservation is really important because threats are constantly emerging and changing. And we need to be able to keep track of this rather than, for example, just continuing with a certain approach or a certain mindset because it's what's always been done in the past. Making use of evidence is also really important because conservation tools and interventions can really vary in how effective they are in different contexts. So something that works really well in Ruaha might not work the same in Searle or in Zambia. And so we need to be able to monitor and evaluate how well these different interventions are working so we can make sure we're really putting our efforts in the right place and adapting our approach if we need to.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, can you explain what ecological research is in general and what it means at Lion Landscapes? Searle?
So in very general terms, ecological research is how we gather information on animals and how they interact with their surroundings. And this is what then feeds into this evidence-based conservation. So this is a really major component of what we do at Lion Landscapes, and it's the core focus of my work. We're particularly interested in not just individual level research on individual animals, but really looking at population level research. And our main focus is on large carnivores. So our research activities on large carnivore ecology help us understand how these populations are doing in the areas where we work. So we look at how their population status varies across a landscape. We look at where they're found within that landscape, maybe what their threats are in that landscape, how they behave in areas with fewer or more human impacts. And so all this information, when we take it together, can help us understand how these populations are doing and how we can best try to conserve them.
All right. So which species do you monitor, and do you need different techniques for different species, Searle?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our focus is primarily on large carnivores. So that's not just lions, despite our name. We also look at leopard, African wild dog, cheetah, spotted hyena, and striped hyena in the areas where we're working. And we focus on large carnivores for a number of reasons. One of the major ones is that they are keystone species. So because they typically sit at the top of the food chain, the loss of carnivores can have really major impacts that cascade through wider animal communities and ecosystems. They also are really vulnerable to extinction, to loss, to range contractions. This is because they exist at really low densities normally, and they have very large ranges. They also have a really high potential conflict because of these large ranges and because of their diets, because they eat meat. And so because of this, these species are really under threat and really need conservation attention. Now, unfortunately for us, large carnivores are actually really difficult to monitor because of these low densities and large ranges, but also because they can be really elusive. So anyone here who's gone on safari hoping to see a leopard, for instance, will probably know what I mean. You can't just go out and expect to see one like you might for, say, a giraffe. And so we can't use the same methods that we might use for these other species, which rely on just directly seeing the animals. So in Tanzania, the two main methods that we've been using to monitor large carnivores have been a combination of spore surveys and camera trap surveys. So spore surveys, spore refers to the tracks. What we do is we drive around and record where we find tracks of large carnivores and their prey and illegal human activity as well. And this gives us really good insights into carnivore distribution and habitat use. So the different reasons they're using certain areas more than others. And we also get similar insights on the prey, which is also incredibly important for these species. With the camera trap surveys, these complement the spore surveys by letting us look at population density. So we can understand population status, how a population of, say, leopard is doing, across different parts of the landscape. So different habitats, land use types, levels of human impact, things like that. As well as obviously getting information on other animals. So anything that passes in front of those cameras, we get photos of. We also do use other methods as well. So we complement these techniques with GPS collaring to track individual animals. This is something we have been doing with lions in Tanzania and in Kenya. But actually this year we're also going to be putting collars on wild dogs in Searle. And we also have guide sightings programs as well. So in Ruaha National Park and Nyerere National Park, we partner with tourism operators, and they basically collect data for us on large carnivore sightings. And this is actually really helpful in particular for wild dogs and cheetahs, which are such low density animals that they're really hard to monitor. So in terms of what we've actually done with these methods, with these surveys, on the next slide, we have the map that shows the surveys we've done. So just to summarize it very briefly, from 2017 to 2019, we did spore surveys and camera trap surveys in Ruaha Rungwe. We did nearly 3,000 kilometers of spore surveys, and we did 4 camera trap surveys. And then from 2020 to last year, we did a similar effort over in Searle Nyerere. Again, 2,800 kilometers of spore surveys, and this time we did 7 camera trap surveys.
Okay, you mentioned population numbers, density, and distribution. What do these things, what do these different things tell us, Charlotte?
So population numbers, people are often really, really interested in population numbers. So like, how many lions do you have in Tanzania is a very big question. But unfortunately, like I said, it's really difficult actually to work out how many of these animals you have in a place. It's incredibly challenging for any animal, but especially the large carnivores, and especially over the really large areas we're working in. I mean, we're talking for Searle Nyerere, 50,000 square kilometers. It's twice the size of Belgium. It's a big area. And so with total numbers, although people like to have them, the other thing is that it can actually be limited in how useful that information is for management. Knowing that you have 1,000 lions in your national park is great. I mean, it can help you with kind of, population viability, but in terms of nitty-gritty management decisions, there's a limit to how helpful it is. So because of this, one of the things that we focus on is population density, which I mentioned just now. So population density is a measure of the number, population density is a measure of the number of individuals within a specified area. So for large carnivores, we typically use 100 square kilometers. And population density is a really useful measure because it lets us directly compare population status between different places or in the same place over time. And because we're always using these same units, this 100 square kilometers for carnivores typically, the size of the areas we're talking about doesn't matter. So you can kind of compare status in a national park that's twice the size of your game reserve in the other place. So that can be a really useful thing. You don't have to kind of constantly have in the back of your mind how big an area are we talking about. So by looking at population density, which is what we do with the camera trap surveys, we can know how the population is doing in different places. So I mentioned before, different habitats, different protected areas, different levels of impact. And it's actually very important information to set sustainable hunting quotas, for instance. So this graph you can see on the screen just shows an example of leopard population density from camera trap surveys in Ruaha Rungwe. So if you just focus on the two on the left, so the orange and the green, the orange is from Ruaha National Park. It's an estimate from the core tourist area. And the green dot next to it is from Mbomipa Wildlife Management Area, which is a community managed area that is just next to Ruaha. And it's the same habitat type as the other survey. So because we're comparing kind of almost like for like, apart from the actual protected area itself, what we could see from this is that the density in Mbomipa is lower than the comparable habitat in Ruaha. And this does line up with what we expect. There's fewer prey, there's more human impacts. And so this provides evidence we need to say, okay, we need to focus more on monitoring and protecting Mbomipa because it's a really important buffer area in the landscape. Distribution is another thing that I mentioned. So distribution is what we get from spore surveys. And this lets us understand where carnivores are found across these really big areas we're working And so this is actually really helpful to identify areas where they're particularly at risk, or areas that are actually really important as well, and just generally understanding how they're using the landscape. So, for example, this map is from Ruaha Rungwe, from the spore surveys conducted by Paolo Strampelli, and it shows the probability of habitat use by lions, not by wild dog, despite that picture. And so, as you can see, the red areas are areas with a low probability of use. So this analysis let us understand that obviously these, so on the kind of right-hand side, the lower right-hand side, the southeast, you can see that it's red there, and that's the unprotected village land. So as we'd expect, there's lower probability of use down there. But we also flagged an area in the south of Ruaha where there's actually large-scale agriculture, as really not having much land presence. And you can also see a very impacted area up in the north, which is a vacant hunting area, which just doesn't have much protection happening now, which is not being used so much by lions. On the more positive side, one thing we have found from these spore surveys is the importance of Miombo woodland for wild dog and for cheetah. So this information was something that was actually quite a nice surprise to us, and we were able to share this with management. And now they have evidence that this landscape, this habitat within this landscape is really important to protect for these species. And that's even though it's less popular for photographic tourism. So this was a really valuable output to kind of feed into their management planning.
Okay, earlier you mentioned using camera traps to look at population density. I'll turn to you, Joseph. Can you tell us how this looks in practice?
Yeah, camera traps are used in surveys to estimate population density, as Charlotte mentioned before. I will take you through briefly through like a field activity, like how it happens. We use camera traps to estimate population density of large carnivores. Firstly, we have to select the study area, which we call a grid. There, we will set out camera traps of a large area, or normal of around 300 to 1,000 kilometer square or so. We normally use white flash cameras because we need to get clear photos, good enough for individual identification of the large carnivores. We deploy our camera traps in pairs, forming a station. They are normally positioned in opposite direction, but not direct facing each other. So they will be opposite, but at an angle, a bit diagonal to each other. This setup ensures that we capture clear photos from both sides of an animal while avoiding flash collisions that could lead to overexposed or blurred images. In our process, we carefully choose suitable trees to mount the camera traps, considering the distance from the trail. We ensure that they are neither too close nor too far from the trail. To achieve accuracy, we conduct tests by crawling in front of the cameras, mimicking the movements of the carnivores, to preview how the photos will appear or will look like before we securely fix the camera traps on the tree trunks. We always keep our camera traps in strong metal cases to prevent any damage, especially from curious animals like hyenas, elephants, and sometimes baboons, who have seem to have a knack or a talent of taking unintentional selfies. So, and usually we have between 40 to 50 pair or stations of cameras, spaced 3 to 6 kilometers apart. We leave the camera traps in the field for a duration of 3 months or so before taking them down. During the period, we conduct regular checkups after every couple of weeks. This is to retrieve data, inspect batteries, memory, address any issue that may arise, but also to remove or clear away the plants and debris which could obstruct photo capture. If necessary, we may also reposition or reallocate the camera traps based on the insights based on the insight gleaned from the previous data. And so if reallocation occurs, it means that our crazy exercise of crawling like carnivores will come in again. That's briefly how it happens in the field.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. And you mentioned how many camera traps are we talking about when looking at the survey? You mentioned 40 to 50 pairs, so I'm just trying to really get a sense of how many cameras are we talking about in a survey?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we typically deploy 40 to 50 set of cameras, like 40 to 50 stations for each survey. And we conduct multiple surveys in our work. During our survey last year in Mbomipo Wildlife Management area, adjacent to Ruaha National Park, we had 40 cameras, which were organized in 40 stations. However, our survey conducted in Searle Nyerere landscapes between 2020 and 2022 comprised of over 300 stations, amounting to a total of more than 600 cameras. This approach allows us to gain robust data and valuable insight into the ecosystem and the species inhabiting the area.
Quite interesting. So that is a lot of data. How do you manage all this data, Joseph?
Yeah, taking into consideration that as an organization, we collect we conducted different programs which brings in different data, but I'll be specifically for the camera traps data. Normally, we will name the files so that every photo has a unique name, and there is a clear information in the file name on where and when it was taken, and back up the data in multiple locations. Here I'm talking about the hard drives. Normally, we have more than one hard drive holding the same data in case of anything. Then we need to process the data to know what and who. When I say what, I mean to know which species is in each photo. And for large carnivores is when it comes to the who, to know each individual which is found in each photo we have for the large carnivores. In the past, these tasks were done manually, but now we have embraced AI tools or artificial intelligence tools to streamline the process. And they have proven incredibly valuable. Thus, the use of AI tools is essential in our operations.
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph. Back to you, Charlotte. You mentioned several species, and we know you recently visited Zambia for training on coloring the African wild dog. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, of course. So this year, following on from our surveys in Searle Nyerere, we're now going to be setting up collaring and intensive monitoring of wild dogs in the landscape. This is because it's a really important wild dog population and they're a really threatened species. So it's a real priority that we've identified. But this is a new area of research for us. So obviously we've studied wild dogs before, but this specific intensive monitoring and collaring of wild dogs we haven't done. And we wanted to make sure we go into this activity armed with as much information as possible. So because of this, Joseph, two colleagues, Leonard and Singira, and I traveled to Zambia at the start of this month to visit the Zambian Carnival program in Luangwa. And this was thanks to grants from Tusk and the Darwin Initiative. And on this trip, we were able to learn from ZCP, who have an immense amount of experience in this area, all about collaring and radio tracking of wild dogs. So they taught us how to use VHF tracking equipment to find collared animals. They showed us how they collect and store genetic samples. And we got to participate in collaring a wild dog in South Luangwa National Park. So this was a really valuable experience for all of us and a great example of how partnerships like this can really help strengthen our research.
Quite interesting. So apart from receiving training, Lion Landscapes also delivers training to others. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so training has been a really major component of our ecological research activities in the last few years, especially in Searle Nyerere. And generally, I mean, this is because I personally, at least, have had the privilege of accessing training in all these different research methods we're using. And our goal now is to pass on this knowledge to the institutions that we're working with. So throughout all of these surveys we've been doing in Searle Nyerere, we have been partnering really closely with the management authorities, Tawa and Tanapa, and the Wildlife Research Institute, Tawiri. And so we were joined during the surveys in the field by researchers and ecologists from these institutions. And we gave them training in how to use these different methods to monitor large carnivores. And we've also done analytical training workshops with them, and now we're really collaboratively working on interpreting and publishing our results and shaping our results into recommendations for management. And so this has been a really collaborative approach, and it's been really beneficial for us, for everyone. These people we've been training have come away with new skills and knowledge, but our research has really benefited from their knowledge of the study landscapes, but also especially from their understanding of the types of information that can really be useful for them as decision makers. And so we're now working to, as I said, collaboratively come up with recommendation reports and feed into this decision making for management in the protected areas where we're working. Ultimately, what we want is for them to be able to go in, do this monitoring themselves. And we've had some really good examples of how the teams we've been training have kind of got that confidence and skill now to do this work. So we had one camera trap survey in Searle Game Reserve that was completely run by a team from Tower. And we had about more than 500 kilometers of spore surveys in Nyerere National Park were led by a researcher from Tawiri. And actually now both the team leaders of those efforts are doing their masters and PhD with us. So it's a really exciting thing to kind of have these people join the team and kind of be part of this research going forward.
Quite interesting indeed, Charlotte. So up till now, we've been mainly talking about the work in Tanzania. Can you tell us more about work that Lion Landscapes does in Zambia and Kenya?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've been talking about Tanzania because it's what I know, but we do a lot of really important work elsewhere. So in Zambia, we do largely the same kinds of surveys as in Tanzania, spore surveys and camera trap surveys. And this is work we do in the Luangwa Valley as part of this Red Plus projects. So this work is part of a biocarbon initiative in partnership with Biocarbon Partners, BCP. And we support BCP basically by providing the biodiversity monitoring component of a Lion Carbon initiative. So the goal of this program is to create sustainable income for local communities that's linked to the conservation of not just the forests, but actually also the wildlife that live within those forests. In Kenya, our main focus on the ecological research side is on GPS collaring and focal monitoring of lions in Laikipia County, which is in the kind of center of the country. And here we collect a lot of lion movement data through our Collaring for Coexistence program. So this helps us share real-time information on lion movement, which we use to help reduce livestock depredations by lions. But it also provides really valuable information on how lions are using these human-impacted landscapes. And this can help us think about how to adapt and improve our conflict mitigation activities, which we also do in that area. We also have quite a few student projects happening in Kenya, which are looking at predator-prey dynamics and, really importantly, human-lion dynamics as well in more detail.
Quite fascinating and very interesting. And thank you, Charlotte. So that brings us to the end of the first session of this webinar. So we get on to the second part. So we are going to answer your questions. So I would encourage those who have questions to type their questions in the Q&A feature. And we can't promise to cover all of them as time may run out, but we'll do our best to try and answer as many as possible. So I think I'll pick those that have put in their questions here. So the first question that I'll ask is from Linda Macurio. Yeah, I think I pronounced that right. Linda Macurio. Linda Macurio is asking, could you address current tracking methods and the negative impacts of tracking collars on animals? I was horrified to learn that several of the cheetahs reintroduced to India may have died because of the tracking collars created sores on their necks, which were infected with maggots and which killed them. I was also surprised that the calves born died of dehydration, which I thought would have been better monitored. What are the alternatives to these big collars? Wow, that's a very interesting question. Charlotte, can you take that?
I can indeed. Good question, Linda. Yeah, the cheetahs in India is a very interesting topic. There's a lot of interesting discussion around about it, but specifically on this point, I mean, it's been kind of a bit of a shocking news that the collars specifically seem to have caused problems, and I know that a lot of people are doing a lot of work to look into that. Generally speaking, with the radio collaring, we do follow a lot of ethical guidelines on how to do this. So there are limits on the proportion of body weight that a collar can weigh for that animal. So for instance, lions can have bigger collars than wild dogs. And we have to be very careful about how we immobilize animals and make sure we follow up and monitor them to check there's no bad impacts. We have to be careful about how tight we put collars, and we would never collar animals that seem to be unwell or pregnant or with tiny cubs, that kind of thing. But of course, I mean, you can't deny that putting a collar animal is a change. I think in this case in India, I don't know the details much. There's not loads of details being made available. I do think it's a case where there's a lot going on. It's very hard to disentangle what exactly is causing some of these deaths. I know, obviously, there was one killed during mating, that kind of thing. But there is a lot going on, a lot of stress on these animals. They're in a very different environment. And so I think it's maybe not directly comparable to if you're putting a collar in an animal that you consider to be healthy. But yeah, for sure, it's something that constantly there is a lot of research happening on how to come up with new ways and better ways to track these animals. So I know there are a few different initiatives going on to develop smaller tags to track animals, including ones that just use sonar and things like this. There are kind of subcutaneous things. Lots of these are still in their trial phase. They're not kind of there yet, but definitely it's a really big area of research and it is an important one.
Okay. Another question from Ruby. Charlotte mentioned about spoo surveys using transects. What kind of transects do you use, and how far is spoo surveys on large carnivores? Is it different every species? Is it different to every species? Like every species has different home range? Thank you for that question, Ruby. Charlotte,
so yeah, I'll take this one. For the spore surveys, basically we're just looking for sign of presence of these animals. So what we do is we will drive along roads and we will record where we see tracks of different species. So we're just looking at presence. So occupancy modeling is a type of kind of habitat use modeling where you take into account the fact that just because you don't detect an animal, it doesn't mean it's not there, which is important for carnivores. So the home range issue it doesn't really come into how we design the surveys and how we collect data. So what we do is we make sure we do is we have representative coverage across the landscape as best as possible. Obviously, we are limited by where the roads are. You might have noticed in the maps that we showed earlier that there were some gaps where there weren't surveys done. And normally this is just because we couldn't access them. Of course, you could walk, but it's a trade-off. So yeah, what we're really doing is just looking for sign of the animals for the tracks.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Rudni Naleba. Hi everyone, thanks for the presentation. Thank you, Rudni. Question 1, does low probability of use of the lions at the borders indicate that they intentionally avoid these areas? Then question 2, how intense is human carnivore conflicts in the conservation areas you are working in, and what actions are being done to solve that? So yeah, Charlotte, Joseph, any of you can take either question.
I'll take question 1, and then Joseph is definitely the best guy to answer question 2. Okay. So for question 1, just to be clear, when I said probability of use in that map about lions in Ruahurungwa, we don't mean that it's more a terminology thing. So we're saying that maybe they're not there at all, maybe they're not using it, but it's not about specifically individual lions avoiding that area. It's just about whether we think that at a population level, lions are using that area. So it's not about like an individual animal necessarily intentionally avoiding. And the thing is, it could be that, but it could be that they cannot persist in an area, for instance. It could be that there's not enough prey. It could be that they're getting killed. So it could be, we don't know the reasoning behind, that's the thing. And that's where you have to start digging deeper into these areas So, we start by getting this picture of, okay, where are they? But to understand why and how that's happening, we have to kind of add more information to what we're doing with our research. So this is where, for instance, actually collaring can be really helpful to understand what's happening. And so that's why actually we've been putting out collars in the village lands in that area that was red on the map. We do collaring of lions there because it's a really interesting area to see, okay, where are they going? Are they dying out there? Are they just not going there? So that's really what we kind of look at to try and understand the answers to that question. Joseph, you are the guy for conflict mitigation.
Yeah, Joseph, question 2, how intense is human carnivore conflicts in the conservation areas you're working in, and what actions are being done to solve these?
Okay, thank you for a thoughtful question. Intensity of wildlife conflict, especially at the area which you are working, especially down in Rua side. The conflicts are there, especially with the carnivores. I will talk much more of the carnivores, though the conflicts caused by wildlife comes from different, both carnivores and even herbivores. So I will talk much on the carnivores and what is done there. Basing on the carnivores, they are, especially for the landscape, the measures taken there down. One is we have different programs. One being we're having these land defenders. Land defenders are the young Balbike and Maasai guys, which are selected from the community, taking into consideration that the community surrounding there is a pastoral, most of them are the pastoralist one. And those are the ones who face the challenge or face the conflicts, especially from the carnivores. They are the first one to get the pin of the pain. So for these land defenders or LODs, the LODs, these guys will help the community by reinforcing their traditional bombers, will help the pastoralists to reinforce their weak traditional bombers, but also they will wake up early in the morning and go in the bush to look for the tracks. And whenever they encounter a lion track, especially the lion tracks, they will warn the community, like, you should not take the livestock to pasture this side, you should go on the other side. But also these guys, whenever the livestock, we provide them with some veterinary medicine for especially for wounds, to make sure that the wounded or injured animals or livestock do not get infected. The wounds cannot get infected. So these guys will have the medication, and whenever there is an attack and the livestock are injured, they will go there and spray the medication and make sure that the wound is not infected before taking other measures. But also, we have the program of building these wire bombers. The wire bombers, these are strong bombers, which may use either metal poles or wooden poles. And these are the ones we build in the community. In the beginning, we are given for free, but now the pastoralists will contribute 25% of the whole costs, and the organization or the project will pay for the rest of the costs. So these bombers, so far, since we started the organization, this program, we have built over 300 bombers. Now, these bombers, what we do is to make sure that we monitor them, make sure that these pastoralists keep them in the way that they're still strong, and repair them when at the time when they become weaker. But also we have another program called it's a monthly monitoring. Monthly monitoring is like depredation monitoring. So we have people in the community. We selected some people in the community. These we call conflict officers. This helps the stays there as ambassadors for the organization. And these guys will collect different data, especially for depredation. Whenever the depredation occurs, these guys will go there and collect some data. This data are the ones which helps us to know where is the hotspot for the depredation, because this depredation, alongside, especially alongside the Ruhr side, depends on the season. So it's not always that one village has attacks. It depends. In this season or these months of the year, these villages have more attacks than the other. So is when we have now that that idea, like which side, where should we put more efforts to make sure that people try to advise people to build this wire bomber, and even if they don't build the wire bomber, we really talk with these lion defenders to make sure that their traditional bombers are well enforced, and make sure that these lion defenders are in a good we have enough number of lion defenders, especially in those areas which we know that this is a hotspot, especially for the lions. Also we use collaring. We do put collar, especially for the to the lions, and we use collars as early warning system. This have been working good with the Evidencebased. We use the Evidencebased software that we have the geofence. So these lions, when it crosses the geofence, we will get a WhatsApp message that notifying that the lion has passed the geofence. And the geofence, there are two geofences, the first geofence and the second. The first one is a bit far from the village land, and the second one is more closer to the village land. So when you get the first notification, it means that you have to put an eye, knowing that the lion is heading to the village. At the time it crosses the second geofence, when you get the notification, is easy, because when you get the first notification, you will call, will put some arrangement and try to call these lion defenders and tell them, and try to give precautions to the whole community on that side, that be careful, there's a lion on that side. So at any time, probably the lion will come that side. But these lion defenders will put an eye, making sure that the lion doesn't bring more or impact to the community. Yeah, those are some of the measures the organization does.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, for that elaborate explanation. So another question from Kevin Vaquiz. Out of all the African carnivores researched, which is the most responsible for livestock raiding? Any of you could take that?
This is another one for Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph, carry on.
Yeah, being honest, I will not say like for the African carnivores, because honestly, I haven't done a research like in Africa, which is leading, but on the area where we work, I will concentrate much on the area we work. On the area we work, basically, the hyena is the one which leads, but the lions, the noises from the lion depredation are louder than any. So there is much more, we put much more emphasis on the lions, because this one depredation from the lion is going to obligate all the depredation happening. For example, per month you might get like 20 depredations. Out of 20, you might find like 18 are out of hyena, but 2 are from the lions. And normal, whenever the lion depredation occurs, we will get notified. People will call, so the phones will keep ringing because people won't rest. But for these hyenas do keep visiting the bombers or enclosures, livestock enclosures, every day, every night. And I think all of the night they use in the village land. Then early in the morning, they start moving to the bush. So and also I mentioned before about the collaring as early warning system. For the hyena, this doesn't work, because hyenas always will use the village land during the night, and this has been difficult to use as early warning system. But also as an advantage down there with the Balbike people from the Balbike tribe, for them a hyena is not a thing to fight for. So they are basically ready to fight for the lion and not the hyena. And that is a good luck for the hyena, that they can easily keep sneaking around the bombers.
Okay, just to clarify, Joseph, when you mention hyena, you mean the spotted hyena, right? Or it's
Yes.
both?
Yeah. Hi, spotted hyena.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Another
Thank you.
question from Linda Mercurio. Has drone technology evolved to the point where it could be useful in tracking, estimating population density, looking for spoo or tracks? Charlotte, you can take that.
Yeah, so I think the thing with drones, they have a lot of really, really cool applications, but for carnivores, you end up running into the same issues that I mentioned of them just being kind of hard to see. So, I mean, even for tracks, to be able to see a track well from a drone, you'd have to be quite low, and then you're getting into the issue of there being trees and things. So I think the kind of exciting area for drones right now is not in this area of carnivore monitoring so much, apart from when it comes to kind of, you know, things like LiDAR mapping of habitats, that kind of thing. And obviously, yeah, really exciting applications for other species, from both drone imagery and satellite imagery for kind of assessing, like for elephants, you can look at populations. But yeah, for carnivores, I don't think it's quite there. Maybe in somewhere like Serengeti where it's very open. But yeah, where we're working, I don't think so, not just now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Charlotte. Another question, the final question that we'll be taking from Ember Coens. A great presentation all. Thank you for the compliment. Are there any efforts to integrate the lion telemetry data into, okay, let me take that again. Are there any efforts to integrate the lion telemetry data with camera trap detections to improve population estimates in Laikipia? Charlotte?
So yeah, so I mean, it's a really interesting and exciting area, this idea of integrating different data types. And at least, if not for Laikipia, for sure in Searle, we're going to explore this. So we're doing a lot of experimentation with lion population estimates, how you can get these, because it's been a very complex field, as I kind of alluded to earlier. And so because this year we're going to be putting collars on lions in the landscape, and repeating a camera trap survey we did in the photographic tourism area of Nyerere National Park. This is the kind of thing we want to do. So integrating that data to see how it can improve our estimate. And we've done something similar with, we've been kind of integrating direct sightings information. So where we've driven around and seen lions, integrating that with camera trap data as well. So basically trying to throw all the data we can get to get as good an estimate as possible, because yeah, it's really tricky to get good estimates for especially lions.
Okay. Thank you, Charlotte. I'll ask a question to you, Charlotte. You mentioned AI tools for identifying species and individual animals. What tools do you use and how do they help? And for you, Joseph, a question for you. The camera traps are set up in areas of large carnivores. Isn't that dangerous? So Charlotte, you'll answer, and then Joseph, you'll follow.
Yeah, so the AI tools, obviously, yeah, it's an exciting area. There's a lot going on. There's been a lot of developments over recent years. Like since I did my PhD, a lot of tools have emerged. So what we've been using now is there's a tool. I mean, there's lots of different things available, to be clear, but for species classification. So for all of these camera trap photos, we need to know what's in that photo. And so rather than going through one by one, what we use now is a website called Trap Tagger, which was developed by Wildeye and Wild Crew, so at University of Oxford. And basically what that does is it takes the work out of the classification of the species. So this AI tool will basically go through the photos and will assign the species that it thinks is there. But it's not just a case of throwing in the data and getting out an answer. We have to actually put in work still, which is good. We have to go in and we have to actually go through and validate and say, okay, yes, this is a hyena, this is a zebra for certain things. So there's still quite a lot of interaction with the data. But certainly it speeds it up. When you're thinking of hundreds of thousands of pictures, it makes all the difference. For the individual ID, so just for some background, for the population density, we need to know which individual animal is photographed by the camera trap. So for leopards, what we look at is the spot pattern, which is unique, like a fingerprint, also for the hyenas. For the lions, it's more complicated. We have to look at whisker spots and scars and marks. But for at least the leopards and hyenas for now, there is a website called African Carnivore Wild Book. And this is what we use to speed up the process of identifying individuals. So what it does is basically you will put in your images and it will tell you, okay, this is the top 10 most likely matches of the same individual. And then we will sit there and look at the pictures and say, yes, that's the same individual. No, it's not. And now this is something that, again, it's not completely doing everything straight away. There's still a lot of work involved. But when you're dealing with a lot of data, especially when you're setting up long-term monitoring, you're kind of getting the same animals again and again, hopefully, then it's a really useful thing to have available.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Joseph?
Okay, thank you for a good question. You asked about the danger in the field or in the bush. It is crucial to take precautions at all times due to the potential danger posed by the large carnivores, though not constantly. As a part of our project objectives, we focus on capacity building for management authorities, as Charlotte mentioned before. We provide trainings to rangers and other conservation officers, ecologists and wardens, who spend significant time in the field, enabling them to conduct surveys independent and with enhanced skills. Hence, during our works, we consistently have armed rangers accompanying us for protection if needed. But also, we work during the day when most carnivores are resting and naturally reducing the risk involved. So that's how it works.
Okay, interesting. All right, thank you so much for attending our webinar, Behind the Scenes with Lion Landscapes. We hope you learned something useful. If you have any additional questions about the conservation work by Lion Landscapes, do not hesitate to contact us using the contact details being displayed on your screen. I will let you know when we will be having the next episode of our webinar, and we hope you will join us. Thank you and bye for now.